Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Chalk Talk. On part one, we broke down assessment and really kind of defined it and talked about the why behind it. On this part two, we're going to get in with Coach Bres on the what and the how of assessment, as well as getting into the examples that he's used with his student athletes over the last year. So we're excited to kind of continue this conversation of assessment in part two. We'll go ahead and get started. This is Chalk Talk, presented by Platform. Let's go. All right, so in part one, we discussed a lot about kind of just getting the definition around assessment and testing, because those are some clear lines we wanted to at least kind of start to formulate. We got into the why, understanding why exactly we're going about assessing anything in the first place, who it's catering to, who it's supposed to be impacting, whether it's the coach or teacher, student or athlete, or even an administrator or someone outside looking in. And then we kind of broke down just knowing exactly like the statistics and concepts that we were trying to break down. From here, I want to kind of get into actually the what. Like, what exactly are we talking about? Because we've thrown out a lot of different examples, just kind of anecdotally about vert, strength, pull-ups, but those were simply examples. I already kind of said there's no one way to do it. There's not like a right way. What we're about to say is not like the platform doctrine, but it's more so just what Coach Bres has started to navigate and work through a little bit on his own, as well as a lot of different factors. So I think first, before we talk about your way, it's about understanding there are a lot of different ways we could go about doing it and what to consider when we're thinking about it for our group.
Yeah, much like we do in almost every discussion we have, I think the first point to make is that there is no answer in which I say, hey, here's what every one of you should do to assess, to test, etc., because it's wildly individual, it's wildly unique. It should fit your personal goals. It should fit your situation, your population. I think taking all of the things that we talked about before into account, why are you doing this? Okay, well, if that's your why, what should we do? Okay, and how are we going to do it? All right, now I know all those things. What are the actual pieces to the puzzle that I'm going to fit in and collect data on over time is entirely up to you. And I think that's important, but I understand also that sometimes it feels a little paralyzing to just think, I don't know where to start. So I thought it was worthwhile just maybe recapping what I just most recently did with a group of 50 high school football athletes over the course of our extended, COVID extended off-season program this past, call it fall and winter, and use that to kind of look at and highlight some ideas. Also just the context that is important and useful, maybe pitfalls, strengths, etc., so that people can start thinking about maybe that big picture for themselves and what they might want to do.
Yeah, and I think like you said, not knowing where to start is often one of the biggest ones. And even this first part of the conversation might lead some people to be thinking about like, well, maybe I am currently quote unquote testing certain things and I should take a step back and think about it differently, or I'm assessing certain things, but now within the context I want to consider differently. We've already kind of talked a lot about like the buckets, like, and I use that word a lot, but like understanding that we're not necessarily assessing a pull-up score, but we're assessing something differently. Knowing that we're not quote unquote testing your mile, but we're assessing your aerobic capacity.
It's qualities, not tests.
Yeah, and I think that helps a lot when I'm envisioning it, is thinking about not so much the like, well, I should just kind of, let me just pick from the list. Squat, bench, clean,
right.
X, Y, Z. And obviously squat, bench, and clean can be assessing certain things, upper body strength, lower body strength,
total power. They can be a tool to assess the quality that you're looking for.
But I think first and foremost, just kind of really drawing that out and understanding that we're probably more so assessing those qualities and not necessarily, hey, because I'm working with a group of football kids, I'm really interested in testing the 40-yard dash or the 100-meter sprint or whatever it may be. So maybe before I let you get into the actual examples, can you just quickly, and we talk about them all the time, talk about some of those buckets at the highest level, just so you know, like what we're then going to put underneath them, maybe, if that's an okay way of going about it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And try to remind me that the fifth one will actually be what we start with after the fact.
Yep.
But I like to think of it in, and again, I've evolved this my own self, like over time. It probably changes slightly every year, but for the most part, it's structured similarly. And roughly speaking, we're looking at, I think of it as four qualities to some degree, obviously each with some subsets and whatnot. But the first is really I hate to pull it out already, but is strength. I think strength is a requisite piece of the athletic puzzle, and I know that it is obviously a piece of a larger element, which is power, which we'll get to next. But strength is a big piece, I think, mostly because of the audience with which we work. So your ability to exert force on the world is something that really anybody at that age is only just developing and beginning to build. And so we're not talking in college or elite athletes that have a baseline foundation of strength. So strength is a big piece for me. And then what usually kind of is the umbrella over top strength for me is power. And so power is the ability to exert force with alacrity, very quickly. You want to talk velocity and speed and rate of force production. And then I kind of put together capacity and control. You can think of control as, your ability to, coordinate movement over time, and then kind of bridges into capacity because it's, coordinate movement under fatigue, which is then also how do you, assess and progress with capacity. So your ability to perform work in one instance, in multiple instances, for long instances over time. I think all of those play a role within athletics as well. So we're going to try to, when we look to assess my group of athletes, create a narrative, a story based on individual tests that hopefully build to a picture of each of those abilities in like the broadest sense.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps. And I think to take those now buckets, as I've been coining them, and considering them, probably we'll dive into each a little bit more specifically, but also, is there anything else within those larger buckets? Now I'm kind of getting into the what to assess. Are you using anything else to put those things into context? Weight, height, anything like that? And I almost look at that as kind of a separate tab that you're using to kind of feed and put that data into perspective. Where does those things kind of mesh in?
No, absolutely. I'm glad you said it, because this is what I wanted to wrap back to is I think the first thing that I look at is, call it just the personal data. And the personal data to me would be something as simple as body weight first. Because as we'll discuss in a lot of the different instances, it's really important to personalize results based on allometric data. Allometric is just your body shape, type, size, etc., as it relates to its ability. And so I need to know, what is you that kind of further defines the result that you get in any one of these tests. I think it's also important because it just so happened, because all of our, we had the really elongated off season for the first time in a long time. One of my goals that you don't normally see that in that power, control, capacity with strength mixed in list that I usually spout out was I actually wanted to see hypertrophy. I wanted to see size gain. We had a lot of young athletes and we had 12 months to work with without other sports. I had time to see, hey, can we add mass? Because you're going through puberty, you have 12 months of uninterrupted training, let's do that. So body weight was obviously a piece of the puzzle. Now, if you're really advanced, you'd also do body composition, because that's a more kind of detailed view of whether or not you're gaining the right things, but body weight can kind of do just fine. And then I think the most important thing, as it always is, as it always should be, because it's the only data in my mind that truly and honestly matters, is, did they commit to the program? And I mean that kind of like figuratively and literally. Did they complete all of the work that was assigned to them? Because that's the only way that you can guarantee the hope for results, right, is that they do everything that they're supposed to. But it also means, did they learn what commitment means? Did they learn to buy in? Did they become a part of a team culture? Did they set habits that are going to carry us through our actual sports season? Because all of the other physical stuff aside is probably quite secondary to that first piece of the puzzle. So I want to collect, who they are physically, that body weight piece, or anything more advanced with height and body composition, et cetera, that you might have. But I also just want to say, how many things did you do? And that completion rate is going to be a big part of that puzzle. It might be a big part of whatever you showcase at the end. So I think that data is probably one of the most important pieces.
Yeah, and I think we didn't touch on that in part one, but in terms of like understanding, as you talked about, like if the program's working or everything else like that, like part of that actually does come into the fact of like, were you showing up? Testing out a kid who came 100% of the time, or I'm sorry to keep using the word testing out.
No, it's fine. That's what people say.
Reassessing a kid, midway through the season or at the end of the season or off season, I should say, who came 100% of the time versus 75% of the time versus 50% of the time are three totally different scenarios.
Well, exactly.
Totally different situations versus, all right, let's take a look at all the kids who showed up consistently. This is the progress that they've made, or this is the places where they're strong, or like you said, weak. Oh, you know what? These kids showed up all the time, but they're still struggling in these domains.
And that's where you as the coach go, well, maybe I need to change what I'm doing.
Right.
Or maybe that goal's just not really important to me, and that's why I did. So that's extremely important. I think it's really, like, this is why, again, the whole knowing your data, knowing your statistics, knowing how to look at data is important. If you say, well, I've got this wide range of athletes, and this is what our averages were, but if some kids only came 50% of the time, some kids were 100, it's not the same data.
Right.
And I think that's important to know for you, the coach, that you can decide whether or not things worked. If only 3 kids showed up 100% of the time and they crushed it, and 97% of kids showed up barely and they didn't do a great job, does your program work? If you did the whole average, maybe not. If you look at the kids that applied to the actual program, certainly. And I think that's really important.
And that's where, to me, as I've always kind of hampered down on the kid perspective, the kid context can actually help you in a lot of ways of saying like, hey, let's take a look at the kids who did show up consistently.
Big time.
Here's the progress that they made. If you were in this bucket and you felt like you weren't coming consistently, or every Friday you took off, or you only came when it was convenient, let's take a look at that. Compare those types of groups sometimes can help for those kids, high school kids in particular, to put it into that context. So
you can frame it for them as well as for you.
Yeah, so I'm really glad we brought that part up. I think it's important and worth showing that when we're talking about these things, we're hopefully talking about kids that have done things consistently and not measuring apples to oranges in terms of the different groups.
Especially, and I have to make this statement, testing or even assessing, and again, assessing is an easier way to go about it because there's low stakes. Kids aren't striving to hit a goal. But if you are timing 40s and a kid hasn't sprinted in a month, you're at a greater risk of some sort of, even if it's minor, strain, tweak, etc., than if you've been training. So that data is important, and it also is the reason that we're just assessing a quality, we're not testing, because you can do that no matter what.
All right, awesome. Enough of the kind of rabbit hole-esque type conversation. I think that's good. I'm glad we went through it. But now let's get into kind of the brass tacks of each of those groups, if you will, with me. We'll go through the same way that you listed them to start: strength, power, capacity, and control, unless you want to go a different order. But as we mentioned, adjusted for body weight, because obviously a 300-pounder in doing a squat or whatever it may be is different than a 150-pounder. Same thing. So why don't you walk us through, and I think it's helpful, just like we talked about, strength, what we're measuring with, also taking it the next layer of like, is it upper, lower, whatever it may be as well.
Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to create a picture of the ability that is strength within each and every athlete. So first you have to think about, well, what is strength? It's not just a lift. It's not the squat. Right? The squat can be a piece of the puzzle, and certainly could be, maybe it's on its own if that's all you're going to do. However, I wanted to look at what is that, or any athlete's total body strength, all right? And So I have to do two things. First, I have to create or find the number of items that I want to assess to create a total picture. So to get total body strength, I did four things. I assessed, so I'm falling in the same trap, assessed the back squat at the beginning and end, the bench press, so back squat, lower body pressing, bench, upper body pressing, the conventional barbell deadlift, lower body pulling, the strict pull-up 4 reps, upper body pulling. Then what I did is then I now have a number. It's simply a weight number for your ability to lift something one time. But what does that actually mean? So you actually have to extrapolate that a little bit further, in my opinion, is to say, okay, well, let's actually find something that's representative of your ability. The number is just a number. Your ability can be expressed, though, as something like your strength to body weight ratio. This is a widely accepted kind of approach to assessing strength ability within any individual. So I take your back squat and I literally compare it to your body weight, and we create a ratio. And the closer you get to 2.0 in our data is like the more elite you are. 1.0 is kind of like that average to like expected, and anything below that means we think there is some sort of deficiency there. And we do that for the back squat, we do that for the bench press, we do that for the deadlift, and then strict pull-up is a lot more difficult unless you have the ability to load up pull-ups and can create what is your 1 rep max loaded pull-up, which totally fair if you can do that. I did a different way this time around, and I should mention that like this is just the one time I did this one winter, this battery of tests. I've done it different ways. You can change it every time. This is not the be-all end-all. I wouldn't even say this is the one I would put my stamp on, but it worked to some degree. For pull-ups, I said, okay, you are to complete as many strict pull-ups as physically possible consecutively with complete and utter total range of motion. You know, like you have to set the standards. And then I say, okay, well, you did this many at this body weight. Then I used the very loose, and you got to understand this is by no means to the point we talked about earlier, projecting out to a 1 rep max loaded pull.
Yep.
Now, there are calculators for that. Understand, though, the moment you get like 8, 10, and beyond reps, the less accurate those calculators become. But for my purpose, I don't really care. It at least gets us in the ballpark. And it allows us to compare over time. So I created a 1 rep max pull, data speaking. And then I said, okay, 1 rep max pull, now your body weight. All right, well, and I should say, this is how detailed you went. You can go. I did the number of reps, the percentage, which is like 93% of your body weight that you pull during a rep, call that the weight on the bar per se, then calculated out your max, then took that max, put it back in and said, okay, well, that max compared to your body weight is this ratio. So then you get the same ratio you got with bench press. And then you put all of those things together. You either choose to add up all 4, average them, which is I actually just added them all up so that your score was somewhere between 4 and 8 or whatever, and then I create a performance index so you can just see how you are compared to yourself, one another, and so forth and so on. But now I have a number that I can look at all of my athletes before and after and can comparison with one another and have a picture for strength. What is their current ability in strength? The ability to apply force on the world, lift heavy things slowly. Okay, did I get the results I was looking for? In some cases I did, some cases I did not. I spent weeks trying to look at it, like, did we do this too much? Not enough of this. I look at how many times did this kid show up, he saw great gains. Well, this kid came all the time, he didn't see great gains. What, why, how, etc. And I think that's the purpose of the data, not just to say you got a 4. Right, is to inform decisions and actions, there forth and so on. And I also created a big document for all the kids to see.
Yeah.
So they got to see what their performance index and strength was. And what was it before? And they thought that was cool. But after the fact, once you see that it's cool, like you've already done all the work. It's here.
Yeah.
You are who you are. So, and that's really what we did for everything, but that was the strength game. So strength was squat, bench, deadlift, and pull, basically standardized by body weight in either the very simple form or very long form, and then aggregated together to give you kind of a picture of what your strength ability is.
Gotcha. Awesome. And I think, like you said, that was data that you created, collected, and kind of toyed around with on your own, and then presented to the kids almost after the fact so that they could, like you said, understand it, but not necessarily be like, I'm going to fail if I do this way or that way. Power's the next one that you mentioned. This one, I think, again, you might have some equations for. You want to walk us through. What are those kind of things? It's a little bit different because I think a lot of times power's tough, probably because it's harder to measure upper body and lower body power the same way you could measure upper and lower body strength, or is that not fair? Can you kind of do it?
It is and it isn't. I mean, a lot of people would tell you that there are ways to measure power. I mean, if you have velocity-based training devices, like there's obviously ways to do that with like a bench press, just like there is a squat. So you could very simply do all the things we just did, but not for 1 rep max weight. You could do for 1 rep max like velocity at a given percentage or whatever.
Yep.
What I chose to do, because again, it's just about what you have available to you, what you can get done in a day, what facilities you have, what technology you have. I just tested, assessed. I assessed power by testing certain things like the vert, and I did vert, 40-yard dash, and the clean. And in this instance, it was the full power clean. So from the floor, caught in a quarter squat, no full squat, but not from the hang. And then I did a number of things to create that same ratio in concept to the strength. But you got to do that in a kind of a more intricate way with regards to power, because again, somebody that jumps 20 inches but's 300 pounds is far different than somebody's ability to jump 20 inches if they're 100 pounds. And that's really important on the field, because we know that 300-pound, 20-inch vertical is a powerful human being that's going to be good at certain things, maybe on a football field, that the 100-pound, 20-inch vertical is not necessarily. So you need to take that vert and kind of extrapolate out what is the expression of power in that jump. You can do that. There are equations out there that actually are already written for you that basically allow you to plug in an athlete's size, the height that they jumped, and give you a power score, which is literally like a wattage number, because it is an actual physics calculation. As you can figure out how much power was exerted. And then I tried to do that same thing for the clean and the 40, because what I got was basically your ability to exert force into the ground and move your body one time as explosively as possible, your ability to accelerate and reach top speed with your body weight in a constrained distance, and then your ability to move a moderate load as quickly as possible, because that's the way to successfully complete a power clean.
Yep.
And then I put all those three things together to give what I thought was a picture of, with regards to what we had available and what we were doing and how we could possibly assess it, your power. And I did the same thing with a performance index and a score and this, that, and the other. You put them all together, now you have a strength, now you have a power. And like, some kids are very strong, some kids are very powerful, some kids are both, but they're not always the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important point too, is that you get a lot of data that informs a bigger picture and gives greater context. It also allows you to say, well, maybe your shortcomings are here, but your strengths are here. I think that's really important when you're talking high school kids. You want to motivate. And if the kid is just at the bottom of everything you test, because all you test is strength and you don't modify for body weight, well, then what about the kid that's super fast but can only squat 150 pounds? Well, then what good is your poundage club now?
Yeah.
Seriously, like what is that doing for those kids?
Right, it's pedestaling one group and again, it's not like everybody gets a trophy mentality, but you're not inspiring the.
But that kid's really good for you on the field.
Right, exactly.
So he should probably have some benefit in the gym as well.
Right, for sure. And I think that's where we'll get into the last one of capacity and control. Again, Strength is one, power is another. Capacity and control, I think, is a kind of nice kind of third layer, because a lot of times it's like you might be super strong, you might be super powerful, but you have no
engine,
right.
I hate using this phrase nowadays, but mental toughness or just ability to grind. People kind of dismiss this nowadays, like conditioning or that mental aptitude for work and control. Like that, it's just like it's looked down upon now, and I think it's still very important. We have athletes that are not high on any of those other two kind of big pieces, that are high on what I call, again, this is just this past winter. I wouldn't probably even use the exact same 4 the same way, but I used 4 things to kind of, all right, not just barbell, not just speed, not just strength. What are the other things? So I took 1 minute of max reps of a single under jump rope, your max elbow plank, and again, it was all about standards, like the moment your hips sag, the moment you round, et cetera, you failed, and this, that, and the other. It's not just how long you can literally keep your chest off the ground.
Yep.
And then it was max reps of a full range of motion push-up in a minute, max reps of a full range of motion air squat in a minute, because I wanted to see, okay, well, if you can squat 500, great, but how much work can you get done in 1 minute?
Yep.
Lower body, upper body. Now, how coordinated are you? How many reps of a jump rope can you get in 1 minute? How coordinated are you when you're fatigued? How, call it, stable are you? And this is an oversimplification, but are you able to just lock it in, and do you have core, midline, total body stamina and control? And can you do it? We all know, if anybody's done an elbow plank, it's really easy to quit.
Yeah.
How much are you willing to
lock everything in?
Or just how strong are you mentally? Like, are you going to stop at 90 seconds because it's uncomfortable when you know you can get to 2 minutes, or not? And I think that's an important thing to measure as well. So I put all of those things together and tried my best to kind of modify it and adjust it for body weight, right? Because somebody that's holding 300 pounds off the ground in an elbow plank is not the same as somebody holding 100 pounds. And so if they do the same time, it's more impressive that the 300-pounder did it.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's important to take a look at. Same thing with squats and push-ups. And I put all those together. And if it hadn't been the winter and it had been maybe in the summer, we might have done more true conditioning
outdoor
for
stuff.
capacity.
Yeah.
If we had an advanced group and not a young group, we might have done double under with a jump rope. It might have been something more coordinated, to really see what how things can shake out. But I did all that to just kind of find a capacity and control kind of group score. So we had capacity control, we had power, we had strength, but in reality, we had like 10 different tests, air quotes, that were assessing only 2, 3, 4 qualities. And I think that's the important point to make.
Yeah, and I think that's a good kind of place to wrap up with what you've done. Mm-hmm. I think you did a good job also too of highlighting some of the other things you could have done or would have done or should have done. So with all of that, let's kind of kick this one to the finish line. We've talked a little bit, as you kind of said, about different ideas, being open to different things. I think depending on the context, depending on what you have available, even if you have certain types of equipment or certain types of spaces or temperatures, depending on the season, there's obviously a lot of different other things that you would do. I won't go into all of them in like the strength, power, capacity, but one thing that we didn't mention, and I know you've maybe done it in the past, is like assessing mobility. Was there a reason you left that one on or off, or is it?
Frankly, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And even here at Platform, we've trended away from using like mobility assessments just because it's just the whole point of, is it an assessment that is valuable, or is it a test to test
something?
And so I think I found that gives you less actionable intel, and I think it tells less of a story.
Sure.
Now there are like if you're an FMS, follower, if you know how to do that, like that can give you a good picture. Did you improve across a broad spectrum because of these like 8 movements that are assessed very well?
Yep.
And like there are other things. Like, again, we back squatted, you could front squat. We deadlifted, you could trap bar. We did vertical, you could do the broad jump. Maybe because we did that in the summer when we had the long jump pits available. And maybe you are interested more in aerobic capacity. If you're indoors, maybe you're on a bike, a rower, or whatever. You're outdoors, you're running. And then there's just a ton of things you can do. The entire point is that it doesn't matter that we did a back squat test. It's that we assessed strength ability utilizing a few different movements and just saying, hey, we want to record data. We weren't testing squat. I think that's probably the most evolved way you can do it. Is there anything wrong with saying that, hey, guys, we're testing out today because you want to create motivation and competition? No. However, I would say it should still serve a purpose beyond I'm just getting your 1 rep maxes today.
Right.
What does that purpose allow for you to do moving forward?
Great. I think where I'd like to wrap up, if you'll let me, is sort of to push the idea of like, okay, like, so what should we do? What should I do? Because like, even what you just described, all of that work you put in is not something, even within many of the platform programs, is what is being assessed, you know? And you mentioned the squat, bench, and clean. That's sometimes a simplified version of doing upper body strength, lower body strength, total body power. And then there's a few additional assessments to be able to kind of like trigger and elicit like the capacity and control and things like that. So even in your explanation, you kind of rattled off a whole different types of thing, all sorts of indexes and equations and everything else like that. What is your kind of thought process in saying like all that energy and effort, did you get something out of it? What if could you have taken and done less or more? Because I think every coach is going to be kind of sitting here thinking like, all right, like I just heard Coach Bres's kind of dissertation on assessment. Where do I go kind of in this kind of large scope?
Well, what you just said is spot on. Would I do the exact same thing the exact same way the next time? Answer is maybe. I didn't think it was hugely impactful. I thought it was useful to see what the programming had yielded. But I also don't think that it was a be-all, end-all, and that's why I like trying different things. I think it all goes back to if you follow a few steps. All right, for some reason, you believe you want to test and assess. First step, why? All right, what is it for? Well, I want to make sure I am creating the best possible athletes, and I want them to see that. Okay. Then you got to decide, well, what makes a good athlete? How do I actually see if that has happened? Okay, well, it takes these, I decide as Coach Smith from wherever that it takes these 10 qualities. Well, what things will let me know if somebody is good, bad, average, better or worse than they used to be at those qualities? Let's do them all. How do I put all of that information together to give me an understanding of that total picture athlete? Okay, then I can compare it back and forth from beginning to end. Did it work? Did the assessment work? Did everything I thought was everything that I thought
Did it bear
true?
out the way I wanted it would?
The assumptions that I made, were they right? How can I tweak that? How can I make it moving forward? And eventually you'll evolve it over time if you think it's worth your time, because it can be a lot of time. And it's things that we're looking into from platforms, technological side, but it is as involved there as it is what each individual might want on their own. So it's tough to say that like, oh, this is the way you need to do it.
Yeah.
It's the way you find success with.
Right, and I think obviously this has been geared towards, an athletic team of kids buying in, showing up, and wanting to be there. The measurements or assessments might be totally different for a group that might necessarily not want to be there.
Absolutely.
It might be different for a group of kids. Like you mentioned, they're younger, so we might kind of emphasize, like you said,
maybe your goal is only strength and hypertrophy because they're all sophomores.
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of different kind of layers to it that I think we have certainly unraveled in both parts of this conversation a lot. There is still so much that we could dive into, but I think from a stopping point, just to summarize, what I've gotten out of this conversation is, first and foremost, kind of moving away from, and even we struggled with using the word test.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's incredibly important to know that these data and these data points and different forms of assessment should be used more in like the contextualized way and not in the pass fail. And I think if you get anything, I think we've hammered that home. And the next layer of that would then be knowing what those things are, because just like if you measure, a fish's ability to climb a tree, they're going to feel like they failed. that same idea goes for, as you talked about, all different types of individuals feeling as if there's just like one type of measuring stick that's measuring them, that they're going to fail or pass, versus a bigger picture to kind of give them context of their strengths and weaknesses.
I think that's a very apt kind of wrap up of all that we talked about with regards to like how and why assessment can and should work. I think it's worth mentioning though that given all of the intricacies there and all the like legwork you have to do, assessment and data can be really fun.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary. And I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, seriously, it's a lot of work. And to be honest, what do we really know? We know that if kids show up, work hard, they're gonna get better. They'll see that, they'll feel that, you'll see that. The eye test is generally pretty accurate. And so is it worth saying that we are a group that tests these 12 things? Because is it serving a purpose? If it doesn't serve the larger purpose, why are we wasting the time with the test to begin with? Because as we talked about, the moment a measurement becomes a target, which is what testing generally does, it ceases to become a good measurement. So if you're not using it as a measurement and it's just a test, what's the point? And then why bother? Why not focus on the things that matter to you, which if it's just our kids showing up, let's find ways to focus on that, right? Because the test, once you get to the test, you would know everything you need to know already. So keep the main thing. What do you care about? People showing up, people enjoying it, and people feeling and seeing results.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to stop. Certainly a great conversation around assessment. I think that if you have questions or ideas or ways that you do it differently, we're always open to them and welcome that as part of the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us as always. And thanks again for tuning in. This is, I finished the wrong way. At Platform, it's always in pursuit of better.